From the original narrow-bodied C1 Corvette to the mid-engine modern 8000 RPM Z06, the Chevy Corvette has had one of the longest and most dynamic histories of any vehicle ever produced. Throughout the 8 generations of Corvettes that have been produced over the last 70 years, one Corvette in particular has almost achieved mythical status. It is the holy grail of Corvettes, the car that makes owners of $250,000 Resto Mod Corvettes envious, and it was one of the fastest production cars in the world when it was first built. This car was the 1967 L88 Corvette. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rare Cars. This is the channel where we go behind the scenes to examine some of the rarest and most iconic vehicles ever made. If you want to watch more short documentaries on rare cars like the Gambala Avalanche or the Aston Martin Vantage V600, among others, make sure to subscribe to the Rare Cars Revival YouTube channel. But first, let's take a look into the bizarre history and insane specs of the infamous L88 Corvettes. Now that we know what made the L88 Corvette unique, let's examine the Corvette that served as its model. Corvettes of the C2 generation were manufactured between 1963 and 1967. A significant advancement in the Corvette's development was the C2. The C2 Corvette had an independent rear suspension system and was built with a V8 engine from the start. It was meant to be a sports vehicle, not a muscle car. The C2 Corvette was broad, low, and rather sharky-looking if the bumpers were removed. Chevy's powerful 327 cubic inch small block, which in top trim can produce over 360 horsepower, was standard on early models. Later in the manufacturing run, Chevy started to offer the big block 396 and even the 427 cubic inch big block. The L88s used a 427 big block. But these engines were much more radical than the regular 427 powered C2 Corvettes, which were pretty rowdy street machines in and of themselves. Now, these engine offerings bumped the horsepower up to well over 400 horsepower to around the 420-430 mark, which is a considerable amount more than the 360 to 365 horsepower available at the top trim 327 small block. These big block Corvettes were seriously fast, there's just no denying it. GM currently claims that this 427 engine produced 430 horsepower straight out of the factory. However, it appears that GM was only as honest as a cheating housewife caught in the act when disclosing these performance figures. Actual dyno results placed the L88 car's real power output at about 560 horsepower. It's also rumored that GM severely undervalued these cars for insurance purposes, meaning that average customers wouldn't purchase them in favor of another 427 Corvette, because, on paper, if they were all about the same horsepower, but the other cars were significantly more equipped and cheaper, regular customers would end up purchasing the regular 427 Corvettes. Those who truly understood the L88 Corvettes would be the only ones to purchase the L88 package. GM only intended for the L88 automobiles to be owned by those who intended to maximize their power. These engines were genuinely fierce, and it's incredible that they were even available for purchase as a road car. To begin with, your L88 automobile needed to be filled with 103-octane gasoline. Consider this. The engines had forged rods with a compression ratio of 12.5 to 1. Hardened push rods, forged pistons, and a high lift can that, to be honest, wasn't particularly streetable. Among the luxuries included in the L88 package were an 850 CFM 4-barrel carb and even factory aluminum heads. But the L88 Corvette wasn't just a big motor strapped to a car. It was a racetrack brawler with no X for fan shrouds or choke to improve streetability. Instead, the L88 cars had a single speed that was equivalent to go. Speaking of gears, the M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed transmission was standard on the L88 cars. These cars needed a strong gearbox to handle all the torque, and the M22 Rock Crusher was essentially the only option. If you're unfamiliar with the M22 Rock Crusher, one thing to know about it is that it has older manual gearboxes and straighter cut gears, which gave the vehicle a louder, more unique sound that makes it seem a lot like a current race car. A positive traction rear end with drag-focused 456 rear gears was achieved by applying power to the rear pavement. Future comforts like heat, air conditioning, or a radio were out of the question for L88 owners. These vehicles were meant to run, and no extra weight would be able to keep them from being too heavy of the track. From the outside, C2 L88s and standard big block Corvettes from 1967 were not all that different. The last 3 generations of Corvettes also included an LED option, and while they underwent minor external modifications, such as the now famous L88 hood, their technical components remained mostly unchanged from the C2 L88 Corvettes of today. Chevy produced the L88 Corvettes between 1967 and 1969. The L88 package was available in both the C2 and C3 body styles, but 1967 was the last model year of the C2 Corvette. As a result, only 20 of the 216 L88 cars that were ever produced were in the C2 body style, making these C2 L88 cars the ultimate collectible for Corvette enthusiasts. Out of the 20, only about 10 are known to still be in existence today. The reason the L88 was such a slow seller was that it was designed to be a race car rather than a street car. It was a car intended for the track that could be driven on the street, not the other way around. The L88 Corvette was also absurdly expensive at the time. In the mid to late 1960s, people weren't spending outrageous amounts of money on rare track-focused cars like they do now. The MSRP of a L88 Corvette was slightly over $6,000, and when contrasted with a base Corvette, which was a far better street car and much better equipped car at just $4,000, it's evident that only performance enthusiasts with deep pockets could actually afford to own a L88 Corvette. Alternatively, the 180 C3 L88 Corvettes saw a far greater degree of use and recognition. They even ran C3 L88 Corvettes at Lamont in the Bonneville Salt Flats. These vehicles have a much more documented history of racing and real-world application. Let's fast forward to the present day, when 1967 L88 Corvettes, more especially the C2 models, are among the most valuable American automobiles ever produced. To put things in perspective, at the most recent auction, a 1967 L88 Corvette sold for approximately $2.65 million. C3 L88 cars are selling for between $45,000 and $660,000. So if you ever come across a real L88 Corvette, specifically a C21, you better take a picture of it because there aren't many of them out there. That is the abridged history of the L88 Corvette. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and sharing it with other enthusiasts. Additionally, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Rare Cars Revivals YouTube channel and that you hit the notification button. Fans, stay tuned for additional documentaries featuring the most fascinating vehicles in the world. Until then, cheers.